Reverend Al Sharpton.
Well, thank you, Brother Stewart. Let me first say I was happy when they called and said that we were going to meet with some of the ministers, and would I come earlier than the presentation tonight or the panel tonight around this question of violence. I thought it was ironic or providential that today, 23 years ago, was the Million Man March. And on October 16, 1995, today, 23 years ago, 1 million or more than 1 million ended up, black men went to Washington around these very same issues. And one of the things that made the Million Man March work is that it made all of us forget, at least for that time, our differences and committed to deal with our problems, because the commonality of our problems outweighed our differences. Some were apprehensive because Minister Farrakhan called it, and he wasn't a Christian. And some apprehensive that he called it, and some of us that were Christian were in it. But we got past all of that and showed a unity that we'd not seen in the history of this country. Now, the reason that was important, there were certain things that came out of it, some followed up, some weren't. But the big thing that I took from the Million Man March was that black young men saw black men standing together. And that was an image that was very important. Why was it important? Because you can't affect anything if you don't impact the culture. And the culture had shown black men as irresponsible, irredeemable, vile, and violent. And to have that image of us standing upright together made an impact on a lot of young men in our community that had not seen that before. Needless to say, it gave a good example to young black women as well. What is not known is about 2 months later, they had a black Million Women's March in Philadelphia, and more women showed up than showed at the Million Man March. So it was healthy for all of us. I raise that because as I speak around the country, and this problem of homicides and violence is everywhere. I'm speaking in Chicago day after tomorrow, a Black Men's Summit. Part of it is that we've got to get to the root. I think one of the speakers said, the root of the problem is that a lot of it starts with the psychology in our community that we are not worth anything. Only reason you shoot something or destroy something is you think it is of no value. And the reason that it is thought to be of no value is that we have been taught and acclimated to feeling that we are of no value. So if you have no self-appreciation, you're not going to appreciate anybody that looks like you or comes out of your environment. And I use as an example myself. I was born and raised in Brooklyn, New York, and my father was a businessman, entrepreneur, made a little money and moved the family to Queens. When I was 9, he left, got into a side relationship, side kid, walked out, and my mother moved us, my sister and I, back to Brooklyn, but this time to the projects. Now, I did not grow up in the projects till I was 9. I was in a middle class home in Queens. Daddy brought a Cadillac every year. I was on my way to being a bourgeois Negro. So now all of a sudden I'm in the middle of the projects with gangbangers, mama on welfare, getting food stamps. A lot of folks talk about food stamps, but I really was on food stamps. You want to know if somebody was on food stamps, ask them what the colors mean, because food stamps go by different colors. And if somebody tell me they was on food stamps and don't know the difference between a gray food stamp and a brown, they wasn't on food stamps. They just talking about something. Because we used to sneak our food stamps out of our pocket because we didn't want our classmates to know we were on food stamps. So being that I grew up in the Church of God in Christ, I was a boy preacher, had started preaching, and as a little boy had started going around different churches preaching. I grew up in Washington, Temple Church of God in Christ, and it was the mid to late 60s. My mother made me stay in the church, and she became concerned because I was always wanting to get involved in the rallies that was going on. I was 10, 11 years old then. And it was the time of a lot of, in the North, because I did not come from the South, she did, the Black Panther Party and the nationalist movement was strong. And she didn't want me to hang out with the gangs, which was the environment, or she thought I would get with the militant crowd. So she brought me to Reverend William Jones, who was Martin Luther King's chapter leader in New York, in Brooklyn, pastored Bethany Baptist. And her and Bishop Washington asked him to take me in because I wanted to be in social activism. And they wanted me to remain church-based. And King's organization, a lot of people forget this, was the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. It was a church-based movement. So they made me youth director at 12 years old, and Reverend Jones introduced me to a guy who was twice my age at that time, who I liked because he was younger than them and hip, named Reverend Jesse Jackson. And I became his youth director, and Jesse kind of trained me in activism from my teenage years. And I go through that to say, had I not been brought by my mother to Reverend Jones, I might have gone and been influenced by what was in the hood. But because she directed me with the help of my pastor, therefore I grew up in social justice ministry. And I tease him all the time. Bishop Washington didn't want me to stay in civil rights. He felt that was a bridge. He wanted me to stay in Kojic and grow up and be a bishop. And Jesse influenced me, so I didn't want to pastor. I wanted to stay in civil rights and have ever since. And I tease all the time that had I not met Jesse, I'd have been T.D. Jakes before T.D. Jakes. I tell Jakes that all the time. I'd be flying around in a jet and we'd be having another kind of meeting. But I tell my story to tell you that is what we've got to start doing more of in our community, is putting our hands on our young folk while they're young, because you're going to want to become what you see and what you feel is possible. I would get on the subway train and ride to Harlem and see Adam Clayton Powell preach. So nobody could tell me that we couldn't have power, because I grew up looking at men like Adam Clayton Powell. And I grew up without the mental boundaries of feeling that the only thing I could do was be a gangbanger. And you can tell folk all you want to tell them. If you can't show them, if they can't visualize it, they will never feel that it's possible. It's also where they can reduce you. And I met and kept going through life. I met others as life went on. I look out and see Reverend King Rowe here, who I've known since I was about that age. King Rowe used to walk me to Sunday school. No, he ain't that old, but we known each other a good 50 years. And part of what my sharing with you is that the culture has turned against that. When I was growing up, and I was 64 last week, and when I was growing up, and many of you were growing up, the average African American or black family was church-based or church-influenced. Our music was that, our culture was that. Even the gangbangers and the street folks came from homes that were church-based. The other week when we went and did Aretha's funeral, Aretha was church-based in a secular context. And the music at that time was self-esteem. James Brown, who later I became close with, singing Say It Loud, Black and Proud, and Nina Simone, Young, Gifted, and Black. That was the culture. As the culture shifted and they reduced the power of the King Youngs in the music industry, they started going into another kind of rhythm where they took our music and our cinema in terms of movies and began reversing pride into degradation. So how did we go from Say It Loud, I'm Black and I'm Proud, Young, Gifted, and Black, to calling ourselves niggas, hoes, and bitches? So part of what we're dealing with, Steward, is if young folk grow up calling themselves niggas, then how we think they're going to behave. And just like Nicodemus in the Bible, tell the 3 Hebrew boys when you hear the music, bow down. The music becomes the seducer of the culture. So there's no pride. There's no self-esteem. They don't even get dressed up and go on stage no more. I remember when I was growing up, they go to the Apollo, everybody would change clothes. You'd want to dress like the artists. Now, artists walk out there, the audience is sharper than the artists. And we see it as the new thing rather than a social experiment to break down the self-esteem of a community. And if we are the watchmen and women on the wall and don't discuss that, we will never get to the core of it, because the problem is that we are talking to young people who have not been given any self-esteem. If you, Bible says, as a man thinketh, so is he. If we can't change how they think, then we will never change how they behave. So the first thing is we've got to address it head on, and we've got to give examples, and we've got to mentor. And the problem is too many of us don't take that time. And too many of us are scared of the kids that we ought to be raising. I go to some churches to preach, and some of the young folk come out of the hood because I go and try to organize them with our National Action Network, my civil rights group. Clay has worked with us. Jeff Johnson is on our board. We try to get them to come into church. And I've had people tighten up, like, what they doing in here? Well, what do you have a church for if it ain't for the folk that need to be delivered? We preaching the folk already saved, or at least pretending to be. When the church ought to be for those that are lost to be brought in. And I think that part of what we need to do is start drilling with that. The other thing is that there has been a concerted effort, I'll put it that way, to demean the relevance and strength of the black church. The black church was the headquarters of our community. Black businesses started in the black church, black colleges started in the black church, black politics started in the black church. When they were able to, in many ways, decimate the strength of the black church, it then became dependent on outside forces. And others chose our leaders, our businessmen, our politicians. Whereas in the beginning, all of that was chosen by us because we were in charge. Because the institution that dominated our community was our churches, which we controlled. So by the time I got my teens and started jumping on those that we would oppose for whatever civil rights or political reason, that they could not entice me is because I grew up watching black folk in charge in the church. Chairman of the trustee board was a black man. I knew what black folk could sign checks and balance books. Head of the deacon board was black man. Head of the missionary board, black woman. So you couldn't tell me what we couldn't be because I grew up watching it. The minute they tell our young people today and use other blacks to do it, to mock the church, it also robs them of an example of blacks in power. So all they see is whites in power, which further gives them an inferiority complex because they don't feel that, well, we can do that because they never seen anybody look like them do that. You realize that whilst blacks was still riding the back of the bus, we built churches with $1 million budgets, balanced the books, built institutions, could draw thousands of people and make it work. All of that they've removed from the psyche of our kids. Even our information. We had black radio that was strong. When I was growing up, you had 6 or 7 competing black stations. Now you may have one. So you don't even control the music you listen to. You don't even influence the artists that you listen to. So the reason they can pump up whoever they want is they select. And we choose from a selection. King Rowe know that they have a playlist. We don't decide the playlist no more. So a lot of folk got upset with Kanye and Trump. Well, one of the reasons why they can do that is Kanye ain't worried about us taking him off the radio because we don't control it no more. Was a time if somebody did what Kanye did, all his records would be off there. You had 5 or 6 disc jockeys across the country, Frankie Crocker, Rodney Jones, who could make or break any hit. Gone. So we've got to rebuild the infrastructure of our community, and it's got to come from the church, which is the only thing we control. The only thing we don't need permission. Only thing that we don't have to get anybody's sign off on. Wonder how all of a sudden do we have all of these people that are speaking for us that don't come from us. One of the things I fight about, I do a show on MSNBC, and I look at these other shows in other cable networks, and they got all these professors and other folk talking, and I said, but y'all ain't got nothing to do with black. What are you talking about? Most of them don't even teach at a black college. Never been to one. But they speak for a community. You can't speak for folk you don't even like. They choked a man to death, police in New York, named Eric Garner. Grandmother called me, sent our people out there, went out there, led marches. While I'm marching for him 3 weeks later, they called me and said that there was another incident in Ferguson, Missouri. I said, well, I'm dealing with Eric Garner. I'll have our chapter deal with that. They said, no, the grandfather want to talk to you. I stalled. He finally got me on my cell phone. So I said, all right, I'll go. I'll be out there Monday. Went out there. They had rioted Saturday and Sunday night. Got there. We stayed, did the rallies in the church, had all the kids in, talked to everybody, was fighting for justice. I spoke at did the eulogy at his funeral. I turned on the TV and they got some Ivy League black professors interpreting Ferguson that had never been there. And the only reason I'm raising it is because there is this inclination to pick and choose and say the black church is obsolete, get them out when you deal with the folk every day. And they sending others disconnected. Because if you're disconnected, they don't have to worry about where you're going because you're not rooted in nothing. And the black church must reclaim the black community. You build the institutions. You buried the dead. You married the children. You christened the babies. And somebody is asking you to defend your leadership. You got to be stupid. Who are you? So when some of the young students came into Ferguson, he said, well, Reverend Mal, why? I said, hold it. First of all, who's asking the question? The folks, the family of the young man that died called me. Who invited you? You funded by some groups that call themselves but who are you? We are too defensive about who we really are. And we've got to take charge. So one of the things I like what I heard about boot camp. I like what I heard about what the minister came behind and talked about what they're doing in terms of and even being brought into South Africa. Because it's about taking charge. We need to establish order in our community. Because it's our community. We need to stop and say, we're calling our community to order. And we don't need the police to do that. We need to do that. The spiritual leaders of the community need to say, we are in charge of doing what we could do, and we're going to raise these young folk into leadership positions and back them. You got to make room for young leaders, because the whole Bible is about continuity. From one generation to the next generation. First thing I always ask people when they come to me is, where do you come from? What's your roots? What's your roots of leadership? What are you connected to? Folk growing up down south, young man come to date a woman, they called it in King Rose, they courting. My day was dating, but they say courting. First thing they did ask them is, who's your folks? First I ask preachers, what church you come out of? I don't want no fly-by-night. God called you on an airplane 30,000 feet in the sky. You ain't never been to nothing, but you all of a sudden the new Messiah. I want some reference point, because everybody in the Bible referred to what work they were continuing. Anybody has no roots ain't gonna last long. You don't judge the tree by its branches, you judge it by its roots. There's some trees out here now won't make it through the winter, but the roots will be there. Because the roots run deeper than the branches. And we run around looking at pretty leaves, all them leaves are gonna die. And we got too many leaf preachers that wanna look good on the leaf rather than nurture the roots that produce the branches that the leaves are on. That's why every preacher, every prophet in the Bible referred to their roots. In the name of the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. That's how they opened up. They didn't come talk about, God told me. They first identified themselves. I come in the name of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Even Jesus. The first introduction we had to Jesus, Matthew 1. First thing Matthew did was bring his lineage back to David. So how you gonna be a do-it-yourself, jump up something when everybody in the book had to refer to where they come from? Is that in the book? Even Jesus said, I didn't come to change the law of Moses, I came to fulfill the law. Well, if everybody ahead of you was wrong, I ain't in that old school stuff. That's back in the day. You already already show you are disconnected. No, I didn't come looking at Dr. King and them as old school. I come to fulfill what they did. Solomon built the temple because David couldn't build it because he was busy fighting wars. So Solomon would have a peaceful climate to build the temple. You're trying to build by condemning those ahead of you rather than building on those ahead of you. And all of that goes to this spirit of low self-esteem. Because if our young men and young women understood they come from greatness and they are the product of people that came from nowhere to somewhere, it would give them a different kind of pride. I remember in 2004 I ran for president and we had a debate in Detroit. Fox did come off the stage that night, and reporter from the Detroit Free Press said to me, "Reverend Al," I said, "Yes, sir." He said, "You did good tonight." I said, "Thank you." He said, "In fact, I think you won the debate." I said, "Well, thank you." He said, "You ought to be proud of yourself to be up there." So I stopped. I said, "What you mean by that?" He said, "Well, you up there, governors and senators and held your own. You ought to be proud of yourself." I said, "They ought to be proud to be up there with me." So his forehead wrinkled up. He said, "How you figure that?" I said, "They all are sons and daughters of men of finance and men of political power. They're second, third, fourth generation. I'm the son of a domestic worker on welfare. They were born on third base and think they hit a triple. I wasn't even born in the stadium. I had to fight my way down through the bleachers and get on the base and then run the bases. And we on the same stage, so I got to be smarter than them. I've got to be stronger than them. I've got to have something they don't have. And I got it out of Washington Temple and Bethany Baptist. The durability, the endurance. I'm not glad to be up here. I want you to shoot your best shot because I come from a people that made it know how. And we got to preach that to our young people. And if you preach that, they won't be shooting at each other. They'll be helping each other and building. We came from, it was against the law for us to read and write. Against the law. They lock up or hurt white folks if they caught them teaching us how to read. Couldn't vote. Couldn't ride the front of a bus. Couldn't go to school with them. Yet we took all of that, had the worst diets. They give us hog guts. We put some hot sauce on it, made it a cuisine. We are an ingenious people. We went from the back of the bus to the White House. It's going to take more than a Donald Trump to turn this around if you know who you are. And that's what we got to preach. People telling me, you think one of the blacks can win for governor? We just elected and re-elected a black man for president. And you run around here wondering if you can make solicitor. We can do whatever we want to do. So we've got to wake the church up. And our role, God did not call us to be defensive. He called us to fulfill the law and be connected to our roots. Everybody here was born and raised in something. Only thing full grown was Zeus. And that's what's wrong. We got too many Zeus Negroes around here. Ain't rooted in nothing, ain't raised in nothing, just Zeus. Born. No, sit down and learn the history of who we are. And then you put them guns away and understand that we can take more than anybody because we took it. Now we got to take our communities and turn it around. I know I was over town, brothers.